Hello, America. I'm Brilyn Hollyhand, 15-year-old conservative commentator and editor-in-chief of the Truth Gazette. Today, I am joined by a man that I've always wanted to do an interview with. There are those dream interviews out there. I say one day, I'm going to interview this person. I'm going to interview that person. And today, we are accomplishing one of those dreams, one of those goals. You see, this guy does his own interviews with people, and I've watched it for years. And he is known for giving his hot takes on every issue under the sun, whether it's in his famous books, on his daily show, podcast, and on Twitter. But today he is joining us to give us some of his hot takes and discuss a lot more. So I'm so excited to have him on. Joining me now is none other than the host of the Ben Shapiro Show on the Daily Wire, author of the new best-selling book, The Authoritarian Movement: How the Left Weaponized America's Institutions Against Dissent. Joining me now is the one and only Mr. Ben Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us today. It really means a lot.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Mr. Shapiro, let's go ahead and get started right here. First, I want to talk about your new book. You've written a ton of books in the past, but why did you feel that now was the time to write this new book about the rise of the authoritarian movement here in America? And for some of our audience that doesn't even know what authoritarianism is, can you elaborate on that a little bit as well?
So there's a distinction between sort of governmental authoritarianism and an authoritarian mindset. So governmental authoritarianism is the idea that the government can tell you what to do without regard for your opinion and without regard to the sort of auspices of democracy, without input from the general public. That is what characterizes authoritarian systems. You've had authoritarians to the right, you've had authoritarians to the left. Well, what I'm really talking about is not governmental policy per se. I'm speaking more about the authoritarian attitude taken by so many people. The left for a long time has suggested that the right is authoritarian in its attitude. They've said that the right is theocratic, that the right wants to dictate terms to everybody else. But really, you're not seeing that from the right these days as much as you're seeing it from the left. You're seeing from the left this real push to crack down on people who do not think the way that they do. And I think conservatives and people in the middle have been feeling this from all of the institutional actors. There's poll data suggesting that every single political perspective in the United States, with the exception of people who consider themselves far left, believe that they are being silenced, and they are correct, or at least they believe that they're uncomfortable speaking their own political point of view. That is because there is this authoritarian mindset that has sort of arisen. It's characterized by a few things. It's characterized by a tendency toward moral absolutes, the idea that you are exactly right, your opponents are exactly wrong, and therefore your opponents have to be silenced for the sake of the good to win. There's a belief in top-down censorship, that all the institutions ought to be militarized against people who dissent because those people are a threat to you. And there's a belief in revolutionary aggression, meaning whatever tactics have to be used should be used. And that may take the form of being out in the street burning things, or it may take the form of working inside institutions by threatening the people at the top of the institutions with financial destruction or company-wide destruction. And you see all of those things cropping up in a wide variety of institutions right now. And frankly, the left-wing authoritarians seem to be having an extraordinary moment, whether you're talking about COVID policy inside bureaucracies or whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter policies now being taken up by nearly every major corporation in America. All of that is a reflection of the fact that a rather aggressive group of people from the left have really outsized power in the institutions that we interact with on a daily basis. Not even getting to the government, just the institutions we interact with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And you touched on this a little bit, but honing more into the elected Democrats in Congress and every other office in America, do you see a rise of authoritarianism among other things, like this push for socialism and communism in current day Democratic Party?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no question that the sort of socialistic view of the world, that there needs to be forced redistribution, plays into the left's take on how much power institutions ought to be given, particularly from the government. If we get to governmental authoritarianism, which is slightly different than the topic of the book, there's no question that the attempt to seize power from the private sphere and put it in the hands of bureaucrats, or to use the regulatory infrastructure to crack down on economic freedom, is an authoritarian move. And certainly, if you want to see authoritarianism in action, all you have to do is look at a lot of the measures now being taken by the public health bureaucracy with regard to COVID. The attempts to prevent you from going outside your house. Take Australia as an example, not even the United States. Some of the video we're now seeing in Australia, where they've relegated people to basically the inside of their house, where you're not allowed to go outside to go to the park. where you're not allowed to get together with more than one other person outside your own house, and that has to be within like 5 miles of your home. Like that sort of stuff, I'm not sure there's a word for it other than authoritarian. And frankly, you see a lot of that sort of mentality reflected in some of the COVID policies being pursued by people in blue states and in blue cities.
Absolutely. In regards to the Democratic Party, they've had control of the White House now for 8 months. How would you rate Joe Biden's job performance so far, and what do you see to come under his leadership in the next 8 months?
I mean, I'm astonished at how bad he's been. So he took office planning to be the great unifier. This was his inaugural address. The idea was that he was going to sort of bring us back to normal. The temperature would decline. We would all, the pot that was simmering would go back down to room temperature. And none of that has happened. He's actually upped the ante. He's decided that the wokest were going to run his administration. Every area of public policy was going to be touched by equity, this sort of social justice, intersectional nonsense, suggesting that if there is any sort of inequality of outcome, that is obviously due to some sort of flaw in the system, and it's government's job to fix the flaws in the system so that we all have equal outcome. That's really dangerous stuff. And then obviously on foreign policy, where the president has the most power, because with domestic policy, he at least has to go through Congress sometimes. When it comes to foreign policy, the president's conduct in Afghanistan is just astonishingly bad. I mean, it is the worst. What we are watching right now unfold in Afghanistan is the single worst foreign policy move I have seen in my entire life. I'm now 37 years old. So you're going back to the middle of the Reagan administration. I've never seen anything like it. The willingness to unilaterally hand over an entire country of 38 million people to the Taliban, and then to not even do so in organized fashion enough to get out our weapons and make sure that the people we need to protect are protected. It's just an absolute dereliction of duty, and I almost can't believe it. It's jaw dropping in how bad it is.
And you're absolutely right there. Joe Biden's lack of leadership has been on the global stage for the past few days with his ongoing failure in Afghanistan. What are your thoughts on what you've seen so far of his administration and what they've done in Afghanistan and what you see to come?
I think that what we're about to see on the geopolitical level is a real nightmare for the United States. I think terrorists grew over their jaws. I mean, itself is wide open on all of this. We now have no ability to truly monitor what's going on inside Afghanistan. It would be a shock if that didn't become a terror base. Putting aside terrorism, the moves by our geopolitical enemies, people like the government of China, the government of Russia, China's already threatening Taiwan. I mean, they've already said, we just don't think that the United States is going to stand up for its allies. Russia's doing the same thing. China's already acknowledged the Taliban. They're going to go in there. They're going to use their Belt and Road program in order to build infrastructure there. But more importantly, to remove the rare earth minerals that are available in Afghanistan in large measure. You're going to see people who are in the middle and allies, erstwhile allies of the United States, begin to triangulate because they just don't have faith that the U.S. is going to stand by them in times of crisis. So you're going to see a lot of countries, say the Saudis, for example, who feel on the outs with the Biden administration, start to militate towards China a little bit, see if maybe there's some opportunities with China or Russia. You're going to start to see Iran get more aggressive. You already have. Iran is already pushing the Biden administration because they feel they're weak, and you're going to see that increase. So I think that you're about to see a lot more conflict. I think you're about to see a lot more war. And that is the predictable result of an administration that believes that the best foreign policy strategy is apparently isolationist surrender.
Switching topics a little bit here, prior to the 2020 election and definitely after it, big tech censorship has been on the forefront of most Republicans' minds. In January, we saw President Trump banned from Twitter, but the leaders of the Taliban still have active Twitter accounts and haven't been censored at all. What do you think we as Republicans and Americans need to do to push back against big tech and their censorship?
So, I mean, there are usually two available pathways. One is you build an alternative. That's been tried. The problem is that you actually need to build an alternative infrastructure. We saw people try to build Parler as an alternative to Twitter. And then immediately after January 6th, Amazon Web Services deplatformed Parler, which to me was much scarier. As a person operating in a free market economy, that was much scarier than January 6th itself, because now you're talking about facially neutral organizations that have decided to crack down on other organizations on the basis of politics. And if that becomes sort of the regular in American life, that really means the country is going to split. So that was obviously very scary. The other thing that I think is going to crop up here is an attempt to rein in big tech via changing Section 230. And I think there are some changes to Section 230 that could be made. I think that removing the so-called catch-all provision of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically says that the big tech platforms, because they are platforms, they have the ability to not be liable for any of the material that's posted on their platforms, but they're also allowed to curate out, for example, pornography, obscenity, violent threats. and anything otherwise objectionable. That last language has been used to police politics, and that's a mistake, because once you have these big tech platforms essentially curating their material to the point where they have become publishers, then I'm not sure why they should be removed of liability. Either they're platforms or they're not. AT&T doesn't have the power to come on your line, and if you're saying something they don't approve of, just kick you off the AT&T line. And it seems to me that Facebook, Twitter, they should be a lot more like that than they should be like Daily Wire. Or if they are like Daily Wire, then they should be treated like Daily Wire.
Absolutely, I completely agree. As somebody that really runs their business via social media, the threat of having your opinion silenced just because you're speaking your opinion is terrifying, and we're seeing more of that every day. Looking forward to the midterms in 2022 and the general election to follow in 2024, what do you think needs to be done by Republicans to have a shot at taking back the House, Senate, and the White House?
So I think that Republicans are in very good shape for 2022. It's an off-year election. Democrats have seen some retirements already. There's a lot of momentum in the polling data from independents for Republicans as opposed to Democrats. Just about 2 months ago, Democrats were up in the generic ballot, something like 14 points in very biased polling. And now Republicans are up 1 point, which is a 15-point shift inside of 2 months. That's a pretty massive polling shift. I would be surprised if Republicans don't take back the House, given the closeness of the margins right now and the fact that redistricting probably means a couple of seats. It doesn't mean 10 or 20, but it probably means 4 or 5. And again, the momentum is usually on the side of the out party. Plus, Joe Biden's agenda is just not popular. He said he was going to shut down COVID. He has not. He said he was going to solidify us on the world stage. He has not. And the economy, well, it seems to have done well last month. Did not do well the month before that, and inflation is starting to ramp up. Or has been ramping up rather the entire year. So I think that I'd be surprised if Republicans don't take back the House. The Senate's a little more dicey because the map is bad for Republicans. There's a good move that just got made in Nevada, where a pretty strong candidate, I believe his name is Adam Laxalt, just declared that he is going to be running for Senate in Nevada. So that could be a seat that shifts. I think that if John Sununu runs for Senate, I believe that's still up in the air in New Hampshire. If he runs, that's a seat that Republicans can move. Ohio's up in the air. I think Republicans are favored in that seat, but that's not an easy race. Pennsylvania is one I think that Republicans have a bit of an uphill battle, because Pennsylvania's been moving more blue than red lately. So that one Republicans could theoretically lose. So they have to hold Wisconsin, they have to hold Ohio, and they need to pick up Nevada. They need to pick up Nevada. They need to pick up Georgia. I think they will pick up Georgia, and they need to pick up New Hampshire. If they do all that, then they're in really good shape. So I think right now it's 50-50. Whether Republicans take back the Senate, maybe 55-45 in favor of Republicans taking back the Senate, but obviously we're still a year and a half away.
Just a year and a half away. It's going to be a fun race to watch. Wrapping things up here, what advice would you give to someone like me who would like to do something like what you're doing one day?
So you're doing all the right things. I mean, you got to get started early, and you have to. My piece of advice is don't post anything on social media, aside from stuff that you've really thought out. I would say most of the things that I regret having said, I said when I was, only a little bit older than you. And then as you get older, then hopefully you grow out of those ideas, or you mature, or you get a little more nuanced, or maybe even reject some of the ideas that you used to have. So, be careful with social media when you're age, because that social media is everybody's permanent record at this point. But aside from that, do a lot of stuff for free. You got to write for free. You got to get really good at what you do. Try to bring people information they don't have, because if you can, everybody's got an opinion, but information is invaluable. And so trying to bring people information first, I think, is a service that people want from everybody, no matter how old you are. So those are a couple of pieces of advice anyway.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Ben Shapiro, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. It really means a lot. I'm a huge fan of you and your work, and I've really looked up to you and watched all of your interviews for quite some time, read your books, read your articles, listened to the podcast, listened to the Daily Show, and watched your interviews. And the fact that I'm now having you on my show is, highlighting my life here so far in the career. So thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much, and good luck with the show. It's great.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, make sure to go check out Ben Shapiro's new book, The Authoritarian Movement, already topping bestsellers list across the country. Also, make sure to visit thetruthgazette.com to watch more of my interviews, and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all The Truth Gazette. And while you're there, go ahead and follow Ben Shapiro on Twitter to get some more of his hot takes. Thank you all for joining us today. Catch you next time. Thank you.